Today, we'll talk about a conflict that took place at the end of the 19th century, which had great consequences over the place of the United States in the world, the Spanish-American War. So, how did it start? At the end of the 90s, Cuban rebels were fighting for their independence from Spain. However, the journalism war in the United States led to the publication of sensational and exaggerated stories about the Cuban rebellion. This convinced many Americans about the US supporting this rebellion. In 1896, William McKinley, supporter of Cuban independence, was elected president, which reinforced the public opinion. Another event increased the tensions between the two countries. In February 1898, a letter written by the Spanish minister to the United States, which criticized the president, was published in a newspaper. The event outraged many Americans. However, it reached its paroxysm with the sinking of the Maine. This American battleship sank on February the 15th in Havana Harbor after a violent explosion. This battleship was supposed to protect US citizens and economic interests in Cuba. Spain was directly blamed for the explosion. As a result, McKinley requested $50 million to prepare for war. On April the 20th, the American Congress declared Cuba independent and demanded to Spain to leave the island in the coming next 3 days. This resolution was followed by Spain's declaration of war to the US. Profiting from all the attention being directed towards Cuba, the US Navy won a victory in the Philippines, a Spanish colony. The whole Spanish fleet was destroyed by Commodore George Dewey and his men. The Americans didn't suffer any casualties. Soon after this victory, with the help of Filipino rebels led by Emilio Aguinaldo, they took control of Manila, the capital. However, even though they had a strong navy, the US Army wasn't prepared with not enough rifles, little men, and inappropriate clothing. These harsh living conditions in Cuba led to the death of 2,000 Americans from diseases. Meanwhile, fewer than 400 were killed in battle. Some emblematic figures in the history of the United States distinguished themselves during this war, such as the future President Theodore Roosevelt and his group of soldiers, the Rough Riders, which became well known for its bravery and heroism. The US then knew a succession of victories over a short amount of time. On June the 22nd, they captured the hills around Santiago. On the 1st of July, headed by Cuban rebels, they overwhelmed about 600 Spanish defenders at El Caney. Finally, on July the 3rd, the commander of the Spanish fleet tried to break through the US blockade. This resulted in the destruction of all the Spanish ships with only 2 American casualties. This resulted in the surrendering of Santiago 2 weeks later and peace negotiations with Spain. Puerto Rico surrendered also with small resistance. The ceasefire was signed on August the 12th of 1898. After the end of the war, all these territories were placed under US control, which resulted in a protest movement from the Anti-Imperialist League. Nonetheless, they couldn't stop the peace treaty, which won with a short majority. Cuba was placed under the authority of Leonard Wood, commander of the Rough Riders. He began building schools and a sanitation system. Dr. Walter Reed helped to the fight against the yellow fever, and he contributed to the control of the situation. Under the supervision of Wood, a Cuban constitution was written. It included the Platt Amendment, which limited Cuba's right to make treaties and allowed the United States to intervene in Cuban affairs. It also required Cuba to sell or lease land to the United States. This amendment stayed in force until 1934. As for Puerto Rico, the island was made US territory, with a civil government including a 2-house legislature. However, Puerto Ricans couldn't beneficiate from the US citizenships until the Jones Act in 1917, and they were able to elect their own governor only 30 years later. The Philippines were annexed by the United States in exchange of $20 million. This led in a war with the Filipino rebels commanded by Emilio Aguinaldo and great casualties on both sides until its end in 1902. The full independence was only granted in 1946. My only source was the chapter 11 of the history course on dual diploma program.